Ted, I want to go back to your background as an attorney, as a constitutional attorney who's argued numerous cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. I want to get your reaction to this audio. We played it earlier in the show here tonight, and I want to know what you think. This is Justice Anthony Kennedy. Listen to this.
What is the duty of a public official if he or she cannot, in good conscience and consistent with their own personal and religious beliefs, enforce a law that they think is morally corrupt? Do you know how many judges do you think resigned in the Third Reich? 3. Great respect, it seems to me, has to be given to people who resign rather than do something they think is morally wrong in order to make a point. However, the rule of law is that as a public official, in performing your legal duties, you're bound to enforce the law. It's difficult sometimes to see whether or not what you're doing is transgressing your own personal philosophy. This requires considerable introspection. But it would be difficult for me to say that people are free to ignore a decision of the Supreme Court. Lincoln went through this in the Dred Scott case. These are difficult moral questions.
A lot of what he says there, I guess from his point of view, is somewhat reasonable, but to draw a historical parallel, Ted, between him essentially being the man that has ushered in this brave new world of questionable, if not outright immorality and redefining of marriage and the rule of law and religious liberty, to compare himself with Nazi Germany, what does that say?
Look, Steve, that was stunning, and that exchange you just played came from a discussion that Justice Kennedy did at Harvard Law School. I posted the video of that very same statement on our Facebook page because I thought it was so stunning to have a Supreme Court justice compare his own lawless ruling to the draconian oppression of the Nazis is beyond stunning, and it's worth underscoring. This is not you or me comparing the Supreme Court to the Nazis. This is Justice Kennedy comparing the Supreme Court to the Nazis, his own decision that was utterly lawless. And what he is saying to Christians is, you will obey the jackboot of what we decree, or you will pay the price. It is a statement that embodies so much arrogance, so much hubris, so much contempt for our democratic process. And you know, one of the things that's also buried in what Justice Kennedy says, he says to all the other officials, well, you must obey the law. Well, Steve, you know well, courts don't make law. Justice Kennedy's opinion, in which he laid out his view that in his enlightened view, the definition of marriage that has been true for millennia, that state legislatures have adopted across this nation, that marriage is the union of one man and one woman, his opinion that is no longer sufficiently enlightened is not law. People are not obliged to obey justices who are defying the Constitution, defying the law, who are committing acts of judicial tyranny. And I will point out that no less than Justice Scalia, in his dissent, made exactly that point, where he said this decision is a profound threat to our democracy. It is 5 unelected lawyers declaring themselves the rulers of 320 million Americans. And Justice Scalia predicts that state and local officials will refuse to obey this lawless decision because it is so outside the authority of the Supreme Court. And yes, Justice Kennedy is telling us that the court is like the Nazis and we have no choice but buckle under to their oppression. It really is a stunning admission of how corrupt the court has become. Is there a point, and maybe this is it, I don't know. I mean, our show's powered by Conservative Review. We ran a column earlier today, not written by me, but saying, hey, Justice Kennedy should have to resign for making statements like this. Is there a point where these rulings, statements become so not just unconstitutional, anti-constitutional, that resignation, impeachment is in line for these judges? Look, of course Justice Kennedy should resign. In the wake of the Supreme Court's lawless decisions on Obamacare and marriage, I publicly called for a constitutional amendment subjecting Supreme Court justices to periodic retention elections, just like you have in the state of Iowa, where you had 3 justices who lawlessly tore down the marriage laws in Iowa. The people of Iowa rose up and threw those judges out. If Supreme Court justices are going to behave like politicians and try to make law instead of following the Constitution, they should be subject to democratic accountability. And these statements from Justice Kennedy show just the utter contempt he has for the rights of the people to pass the laws to govern ourselves, and that they should rightly prompt outrage.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz, our very first guest on the remastered Steve Deace Show. Ted, thank you very much for joining us tonight.